Anthony King is a professor of war studies at the University of Exeter and joins me now. I think Russia are currently claiming that the drones were of Ukrainian origin, which I suppose is possible, Anthony, but surely unlikely.
Yes, and I agree. And more news has happened in the last 24 hours than in a decade in previous times, for sure. Yeah, I mean, it's possible. For instance, the Ukrainians have mounted many drone attacks on Russia and Russian airspace since the start of the war. They also committed certain acts of sabotage on the Nord Stream pipeline back in 2022. But I think it's just Russian misinformation. But it's interesting misinformation, because what it suggests, I mean, there's been various interpretations to this incursion into Russian airspace, and one of it is it was strategically deliberate to provoke NATO. The fact that they then made this accusation that it's Ukrainian suggests to me, which was my inference anyway, that it was a mistake. The Russians have been mounting an increasing strategic bombardment on Ukrainian cities over the last few months. Over 200 people were killed in July alone. And I suspect I infer that this is a widening of that campaign, but one where somewhere down the track, and there's quite a lot of incompetence in the Russian military, that there's been a mistake in terms of the programming of these drones or the control of this drone wave. I mean, it makes no material difference to the outcome that they've been striking Ukraine and that they have made incursions into Polish airspace. But I think it's Russian, and I think it's Russians pushing the envelope rather than deliberately provoking NATO.
And I mean, it doesn't change the narrative of escalation, even if this specific part of the process turns out to be a mistake. It's clear that in recent days, as the European Union Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas said, Russia is escalating now, not ending. The biggest, I think, aerial attack on Ukraine since the war began just 3 days ago.
Yeah. Absolutely. And indeed, one could, I think there's a strategic reason. So to open up a sort of northern flank of attack from Belarus means that they can strike more Ukrainian cities. They're putting more pressure on Ukrainian air defense. Ukrainian air defense has been good, but most of the attacks have come from the east. So presumably the Russians are then thinking, well, if we come from the north or even from the east simultaneously, we'll put additional pressure and our strikes are likely to be more effective. And this has absolutely been the strategy since we look like we might be approaching some kind of ceasefire or peace deal. Of course, the Russians want to put themselves in the absolute prime position they can. And the two prongs of attack have been ground attacks in the Donbass around Pokrovsk and increased air attacks. And absolutely, this attack overnight is part of that dual strategy, and especially that increased strategic air bombardment onto Ukrainian cities. Absolutely part of that.
What footing? I was struck by the defence minister, the Polish defence minister, thanking NATO Air Command and Royal Netherlands Air and Space Force for supporting their action with F-35 fighter jets. What footing is Poland on in this space?
Well, NATO is on a heightened footing, and in terms of air defence, NATO is always on a sort of surveillance monitoring of its airspace at all times. I don't think it's been a heightened footing in terms of having squadrons in the air at all times. But NATO, in terms of air surveillance, is on 24-hour watch and always has been. And of course, because it's NATO, air squadrons will be cut from other countries, and that will explain why in this particular case it's Danish F-16s that were useful.
Dutch.
Now after this attack, I have no doubt that NATO will have to, especially on those eastern flank countries, NATO will have to increased its air surveillance and will want to demonstrate that increased air surveillance, even though, as I say, I don't think it was Russia's intention to provoke and escalate NATO. I mean, not out of moral reasons. I think pure instrumental strategic reasons. Putin gains nothing from that. And as I say, as we start the conversation, the subsequent accusations of Ukraine suggest that, although, of course, that's also a bit of Russian misinformation, I think.
So regardless of how it happened, the fact that this is the first time NATO planes have engaged potential threats in Allied airspace is a game changer.
Yes. I mean, I might not say a game changer, because I think the game changer, of course, was the original invasion, 22nd February 2022. What it brings home is that the military threat is there, and the triggers are also a little bit closer than we might think. And European leaders, NATO leaders need to be very well aware of that, and to actually have deterrence plans, but also serious plans for these potential incursions, to make sure they don't escalate. I mean, that would be, most people support Ukraine completely. That's the official line, and certainly I would.
Yes.
But we don't want an escalation, a horizontal escalation into a wider European conflict.
Let's pretend you're wrong, and it was deliberate. What conversation would we be having now?
Well, to be honest, it would be exactly the same. So let's say it was deliberate. So let's say the Russians thought, right, we're going to go into Polish airspace because we want to see what the political and military reaction is. Well, on both levels, what they've received is, essentially, as far as the evidence is, all of the drones that went into the Polish airspace were destroyed. So, and there is complete political unity. So, in fact, even if the intention was entirely what the negative interpretation, the most sort of rational interpretation, the most extreme interpretation of Putin, the reaction would be completely the same. Militarily, destruction and protection of airspace; politically, complete unity. And so, in a sense, it makes no difference. Now, in terms of strategy, what is the difference? It shows this. Putin won't be brought to the peace table by negotiations. I mean, it's an insult to the whole Anchorage process that he's killed dozens of people since that process, that he's then mounted this strike, which either deliberately or accidentally has gone through Polish airspace and they don't care. He damaged the British Council and the EU delegate office in Kyiv last month.
Yeah.
There is only one way to some kind of peace deal in Ukraine, and that, unfortunately, is through military power. And if not the defeat, then the demonstration that Ukraine cannot prevail militarily. So that, for me, is the strategic lesson from this incursion.
And we will never know for sure, will we? I mean, you can establish whether or not they're Ukrainian drones or Russian drones by collecting the debris, presumably, but we'll never know for sure, because even if Russia tell us one story, we won't be able to...
We might know in 50 years' time,
right,
when the archive is released. So some very interesting archives are being released from the 1950s, 1960s. We will, well, anyone who's over a certain age will not be around to see that, but we won't know comprehensively, because Putin will never release it. So we have to live in this odd netherworld that is Russian misinformation. So
finally then, Anthony, what are you looking out for now? What are you sort of watching
Well, what
for?
I would hope for, I mean, let me say what I hope for. What I'd hope for is a change of position in terms of Trump. That is the key. That administration is the key agent. And for me, the only path forward is one of complete support of Ukraine and an increase of military support to inflict that battlefield defeat, or at least battlefield demonstration on Ukraine, that Russia can't proceed any further. And that, to me, it's a regrettable thing to say, but that's the only route, to me, to some kind of ceasefire, some kind of peace deal, however unsatisfactory it's going to be for the Ukrainians, frankly.